Greetings, all praise the King. Welcome to Eyewitness. Before we get into the topic, Ross solicits an offer for $50 for a head covering, handmade, 100% natural fiber, no synthetic, no mix, natural colors, red, gold, and green. Tight. Doesn't have to be big. Just has to stay on. Today we're speaking of the term scapegoat. This originates from the scripture in the book of Leviticus, chapter 16. Aaron required to make atonement for the sin of the children, and one offering presented to Lord as a goat, the other offering in which the lot did not fall is let go into the wilderness after a ceremonial requirement is met. This is the scapegoat. Sure, if I can draw a goat, we'll try. Goats have tails? Oh, for sure. So here's the goat. Basically, as many of these terms are adopted and put into use today, this being one, not necessarily the language, yet the concept. So, as many know, this equates to an excuse, a kind of pointing of fingers. There's a line here, because this is the righteous and this is the unrighteous. And this is when someone chooses to hide their responsibility or to disguise operations. So in a war situation, it becomes convenient to blame the adversary for the crime. If that be a chemical attack, if this be a cyber hack, today in this government called the United States of America, and as well as the other governments, do point their fingers and they say, it's not us, it's them. Talking about, the Russians, the Chinese, or some kind of a terrorism. It's not unreasonable to assume that those entities do the same. And what happens is, there's an enemy. So there's a goal now to defeat the enemy. Probably people inside the military are told, we're doing this now psychologically and whatnot. The goal is to build up those forces. Because once you have this enemy, now you have a reason for being. And now you need the weaponry. Could you just think about if the military says, we just shook hands with Russia, we just shook hands with China, we just shook hands with Taliban, we shook hands with these other groups that we made up, and now we have no enemies, we only have friends. then they would receive less funding. Because why do you need the funds? So right now, most of the operations work to benefit the few individuals that control the wealth on the planet. And they do so through their barricades, called corporations and other companies, including the military. So they have to protect this wealth, and that's why they need the military. One time there was an interview or a so-called discussion on the neo-pagan radio with a guy that was kicked out for, who knows, must not be too good. But he had a guest that was saying if there's no democracy, then there's military rule. He said it real cool and calm. That what they have now, which is called a republic, money buys the elections. The rules are written by the monkeys. If this doesn't exist, then you have something called military takeover, which sounds to me like everything that they claim to speak against. And perhaps a scapegoat in itself, in the sense where, well, it's not so perfect, but if we don't have it this way, then it's gonna be worse. Make sure. So you hear this kind of rationale often, where people are saying, well, if you don't choose this option, if you don't take this plea bargain, then you're gonna have to go through hell. And so this is the conventional scapegoating. Now, there is a term, perhaps never defined, except for now, called reverse scapegoating. Now this would be when someone is looking to take the responsibility onto themselves for the crimes of someone else. Why would somebody do that? Well, simply because they're being incentivized to do so. We're on the topic of war. You have the wars in the Middle East. Those resources and the wealth that is gained from the pillage of those countries probably goes somewhere. And its proximity to the European regions is convenient. If you're looking at fossils, natural gas or oil, it can be shipped most efficiently by pipeline. Maybe not for the planet and the people and creatures that exist within, but for the benefit of the whoremongers. And this pipeline is going to be difficult to build across the Atlantic Ocean. So, those that actually will benefit from the war, for example, in Syria, are probably not in the United States. And yet, the United States is so-called spearheading the operation, even through their proxies such as ISIS. And when I say there, remember, they're under the command of other so-called governments, companies, and corporations. Pedophile recently said that the military takes cash not to be sucked but expect to be paid. That's a bold statement. But unfortunately, the so-called, communication channels seem to brush it aside because that's the game. Even that is perhaps a form of scapegoating. Whereas the less important issues are discussed more frequently. It takes the attention off of where it should be. So for certain, the Babylon way is a form of witchcraft. If you have a company like Facebook, they're gonna now all of a sudden try to take the blame for all the spying. Because they're out there, they're big, and they have a large following, and people are in bondage that they are afraid to free themselves from. They've built up, the same as this whatever platform here, is that you have put so much into it that now it's like you're a slave to it, right? Because you don't want to lose your stuff. You know, maybe you got people that watch the videos, you got views, you think that's really a big deal. You don't want to lose the views, so somebody hacks into the account, you know what I mean? So you spend so much energy and time trying to defend yourself. Even if nobody's coming at you, you still you got to change your past. You got to keep up with this, see what's going on. Encryption, they're telling you what. So Facebook is functioning as a reverse scapegoat. Yeah, they're part of the problem, but they're taking the accountability off of those behind the scenes, and in particular, their government. Because their government's permitting them to do what they do, and they permit them to do what they do because they know it's a private company, and they say, oh, we got no power over these private corporations if they get so big. So the real focus should be on their government, because if their government is not protecting people against infiltration, then their government is not doing the work that it claims to be. See, if their government stood up and said, hey, we're not protecting no one, we're getting certain people rich, it don't matter if they live here, it don't matter if they, live like beasts, we're going to protect them, then I suppose there'd be no reason to really even speak on it. But the deception is there. They branded themselves as something holy, and they've done through by this. What of these so-called leaders are willing to stand up and say, hey, it's my fault. We got paid from the British, the French, and so on, to go over and topple this regime. We paid, we gave money to Saudi Arabia, they gave money to the ISIS group, so on and so forth. Somebody stand up and say that and really drive the point home. Don't just, all right, somebody said it, now let's go ahead and talk about how ISIS is coming into the, because that's what they keep doing, is using the same language to form these perceptions. They're not necessarily real. They're a fabrication. But again, the language is used to not directly lie. These are indirect lies. Now, there's another term I'm calling return scapegoat. This is a new, sophisticated method of scapegoating, where the scapegoat comes back to you. And this is done when, for example, the perception is created that the Russians are the ones that are to blame. They're hacking into people. They're changing the elections. They've got the biggest politicians in the land in their pockets. And then, this isn't just being said in this so-called United States, but over the other so-called governments as well. The Russians or the Chinese, but let's stick with the Russians. So now, we're being told that the Russians have touched some people here, citizens, and that these citizens now are working for the Russians. You know the term, a Russian troll. So now the perception becomes that if anybody says something subversive to the bird, then they're being paid by the Russians. And people generally don't want to like someone that's being paid. See what I'm saying? So if somebody's doing something because they know it's right, and they're expending their time and resource and energy to do so, and not being paid, then it sends a particular statement. But if you create the perception that somebody's talking because they're being incentivized by the enemy, Russia, you certainly paint that person to be a villain. So even though the persons, people, individuals, whoever they are, because these people don't identify who they are, they just paint these kind of Picasso crappy pictures that it can be interpreted however, and yet the way that it's presented is the framing that it's done so to point the blame at the person who is speaking subversive. So this is going to go on in the future. And again, it's not just Russia, China, these new terrorist organizations that they're paying, ISIS, you name it. It will go on